Ladies and gentlemen, understand that we live in a country where the inequality towards the education system still exists. Realize on how the children who live under the poverty cannot get a chance to tap into the higher education. That's why we're supporting the agenda that only giving the scholarship itself toward the children who live in the poverty. So first thing first, I'm going to explain on how the scholarship itself is actually look like. So the agenda of scholarship is actually a kind of funding money from the government toward the children who's not having the capability to pay the tuition, simply because the parents cannot fulfill their necessity of education, ladies and gentlemen. And also by this agenda, it's actually a chance for the children who live in a poverty to still get getting the right of education without have to paying for the tuition itself, ladies and gentlemen. So in Indonesia, the government actually defining this kind of scholarship system into the two aspects. The first one is that the scholarship for the student who's having a tremendous achievement. So how does it look like? The government wanted giving a free funding of education toward the student who's successfully getting some of achievement, like for example, like this successfully being a winner of national, international, or even regional competition. Simply because the government wanted giving a kind of appreciation towards the student in purpose that it can motivating them for being a better one, ladies and gentlemen. For example, like in Indonesia, we're having the Jarum scholarship who actually giving a funding money towards the person who's successfully achieving some of achievement or even getting the high score on their school or university, ladies and gentlemen. Regardless of the fact whether this person is actually coming from the family who having a stable economic or even live in a poverty. So the person who actually capable enough to pay the tuition still can get this scholarship simply because they are already achieving something during their education, ladies and gentlemen. So we're taking the conclusion that the student who actually coming from the rich family is actually can apply this kind of scholarship, ladies and gentlemen. So coming to the second idea about scholarship for students who live under the poverty. The government actually still putting the rule for any student who wants to apply for this kind of scholarship, ladies and gentlemen. So basically, the one who actually get a chance to get this thing is actually the student who live in a poverty, but also being an achiever during their school, ladies and gentlemen. So if you're living in a poverty but didn't have any kind of achievement or never even get a high score rank, you cannot apply this kind of scholarship, ladies and gentlemen. So realize on how this kind of agenda of scholarship is actually giving us a portrayal on how the government giving the inequality towards the education system in Indonesia. So based on the idea of inequality, we're gonna run this policy to only giving the scholarship towards the person who live in a poverty, regardless of the fact whether this person is actually having an achievement or not, in the purpose to teach the equality of education towards the poor children and also giving them a chance to change their life into a better one, ladies and gentlemen. So understand that people always talk to live in a poverty based on two reasons. The first one is that they actually lack of education. Ladies and gentlemen, they actually lack of education simply because they didn't have enough capability to pay for the tuition itself. Or maybe their parents cannot fulfill the necessity of education because their parents also really hard to apply for a job, ladies and gentlemen. Like they didn't even having a capability of skill that can supporting them to get a job, ladies and gentlemen. So, and also realize on how this kind of people is actually have a tendency to having no motivations to change their life into a better one, ladies and gentlemen. And the second reason is that about the idea of limitation. Ladies and gentlemen, realize that they didn't have enough facility to increasing their livelihood. Like, for example, like they're living in a house that really unappropriated to be called as a place to take a rest, ladies and gentlemen. Like, they have to waking up for all night long to preventing the flood that possibly could be happen in a rainy day. And also, ladies and gentlemen, they didn't have many of time to tap into the higher education, simply because this person is actually have to fulfill their prime necessity to pay their education, ladies and gentlemen. So basically, this kind of person is actually have a tendency to putting the necessity to getting job upon the necessity to get in the education, ladies and gentlemen. For example, like this person is actually tend to being a beggar or a street sweeper because it's actually the only job that they can reach because they actually lack of skill itself, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to talk about 2 points in this debate. The first one is that how the former agenda giving the inequality toward the student who live in a poverty, and the second one is that on how this is a solution by limiting the one who can apply for scholarship, like just giving it into the poverty student, gonna create the equality and increasing the education system in Indonesia, ladies and gentlemen. So coming to the first idea on how the former agenda giving the inequality towards the student who live in poverty, ladies and gentlemen. So basically there are two reasons. The first one is that we're gonna take a look on on the comparison between the achiever student who live in a good economic family and the achiever student who live in a poverty, ladies and gentlemen. So the first one is that the student who live in a good economic is actually having enough facility and financial to supporting their education, ladies and gentlemen, simply because the parent having the financial capability to give them a good quality of something that can supporting their education. For example, like they're capable enough to get an additional tutor, and also they're capable enough to buy something that can supporting their education, ladies and gentlemen. That's why it's real possible for them for being the achiever student, because they're actually capable in any kind of aspect, ladies and gentlemen. So the second one is that the student who living under the poverty. This kind of student totally didn't even have enough facility that can supporting their studies, ladies and gentlemen, simply because their lack of money, because the parents didn't have a job who can generally fulfill their necessity of education, ladies and gentlemen. For example, like they cannot get a chance to pay the internet data and searching the lesson, or even to getting the additional tutor or bimbel, ladies and gentlemen, simply because like what I've ever told you about the reason on how this kind of person is actually lack of financial itself, ladies and gentlemen. So that's why we have to put the poverty student into the very first place for getting the scholarship, ladies and gentlemen, because by putting them into the very first place, we can create the idea of equality towards the education system in Indonesia. And the second idea on how the poverty student who also didn't have an achievement automatically didn't even get a chance to tap into the higher education if this agenda still exists, ladies and gentlemen, because realize on how this poverty student is actually lack of any kind of aspect, and the government is actually didn't have a desire to helping them by this kind of scholarship, ladies and gentlemen, simply because the government is actually have a tendency to supporting the funding of education towards the person who actually capable enough to be an achiever, ladies and gentlemen. So is actually enough to giving us a portrayal on how the government is actually giving the inequality towards the education system in Indonesia. So coming to the first idea on how the solution by limiting the one who can apply for scholarship, like just giving it into the poverty student, gonna create the equality and increasing the education system in Indonesia, ladies and gentlemen. So by giving a chance of scholarship, like only for the poverty student, we can give a fairness towards all over the Indonesian students. Like understand that I ever told you that the poverty student who living in a poverty is actually have a tangible reason on how their lack of accessibility, on how their lack of financiality, and also and so on and so forth, ladies and gentlemen. So ladies and gentlemen, we believe that by limiting the proposal of a scholarship, like just only give the scholarship into the student who live in a poverty, regardless like they're actually an achiever student or not, we can create the equality towards the poverty student, ladies and gentlemen. Like and also by this agenda, we can increasing the student rate quality, the student rate quality in Indonesia. So as a proposition, we probably still propose. Thank you.